We are continuing in today's Mishna Yomi, Maseches Peah, Perek Vav, Mishnah is Zayin through Ches. Chapter 6, Mishnah is 7 through 8. So Mishnah Zayin says as follows, Kama sheyesh basa sai mushacha. So here's the following case. Remember again, in the last Mishnah, we learned about the idea that if you forget a bundle that is the size of 2 sa'ah, that forgotten bundle does not have a din of shechacha. And the reason is that since it's so big, it's not considered to be a bundle, but rather it's considered to be a pile in and of itself. And therefore, again, the laws of shechacha don't apply to it. In a similar vein, the Mishnah says over here, remember that there are times where standing grain can also be considered shechacha. So let's say you forgot standing grain, and the standing grain itself has a volume of 2 sa'ah, ino shechacha. It's also not considered to be shechacha. Ein bo sasayim aval hi ru'uya la'asos sasayim. So another interesting case. Let's say the standing grain itself is not in the amount of 2 sa'ah. Now, to understand this, the Bartanur explains, imagine you have standing grain, and it's not producing 2 sa'ah of wheat. But that's because it's not producing at full capacity. In other words, if the grain were to grow to full height, or full width, or full, whatever the right term is for wheat, to be fully developed, then it would produce 2 sa'ah, afilu hi shal tofach, even if it's withered, roin osa kihili anava shal se'orim. We view it as if it is full-sized barley kernel. So here the Mishnah introduces us to something interesting. So now, in the previous Mishnah, we learned that if you left behind a pile that was 2 sa'ah, it's not called shechacha. Now the Mishnah tells me, in addition to that, if you leave standing 2 sa'ah, if you leave 2 sa'ah of standing wheat that you did not go ahead and cut down, that's also not called shechacha. It's too significant to be called shechacha. And lastly, the Mishnah says, if you left behind a patch of wheat, and let's say the wheat as it stands right now is not really 2 sa'ah, but if it were to be fully produced, fully developed, it could potentially produce 2 sa'ah, then we view it as if it is 2 sa'ah, and therefore it is not considered to be shechacha. Incredible. Mishnah Ches, excuse me, another fascinating Mishnah. The Mishnah says as follows, Hakama matzeles asa omer v'asakama. So to give a little bit of background to this. So we learned earlier, excuse me, earlier in Perek Hey, an interesting idea that halacha l'maisa, if you have grain that has not been harvested, standing grain, and halacha l'maisa, you forgot it, standing grain could also become shechacha, like we just mentioned before. However, halacha l'maisa, if the quote-unquote forgotten standing grain is in close proximity to a part of the field that has not yet been harvested, then halacha l'maisa, the quote-unquote forgotten standing grain, doesn't have the din of shechacha. Now, the logic behind it is very simple, because since the forgotten standing grain is next to a part of the field that has not yet been harvested, we know that the farmer is going to come back to harvest the quote-unquote, he's going to come back to harvest the standing grain, and therefore, by definition, he's also going to come back to harvest the forgotten grain as well. So based on this, the Mishnah says as follows, Hakamo. So let's say you have standing grain, matzeles esa omer ve'esakama. This is very interesting. So now let's say you have standing grain, in other words, in a part of the field that halacha l'maisa went ahead and has not yet harvested. So you have a part of the field that has not yet been harvested. So let's say next to that part of the field, you forgot an omer or a kama. You forgot a bundle of grain, or there's forgotten standing grain. So what's the halacha? Ultimately, again, the Mishnah says, matzeles as omer v'asakama, which means, so again, a very simple, an incredibly profound idea, which is, if there is standing grain which has yet to be harvested, and that standing grain is next to either a forgotten bundle or another patch of forgotten standing grain, the yet to be harvested grain saves the bundle, and the forgotten standing grain from becoming shechacha. Seemingly, as we said before, because since halacha l'maisa, the farmer is going to come back to harvest the patch that he has not yet gotten to, he's by definition going to find the bundle, by definition going to find the forgotten standing grain, and therefore halacha l'maisa doesn't have the din of shechacha. However, ha'omer eino matzil lo as ha'omer v'lo as hakama. But for example, let's say you have a bundle of grain that has not yet been collected, and that bundle which has not yet been collected is next to another bundle which has been forgotten, or next to standing grain which has been forgotten, the presence of a not yet collected bundle does not save a forgotten bundle or forgotten standing grain from becoming shechacha. So an interesting distinction. So if you have a forgotten bundle or you have forgotten standing grain next to a part of the field that has not yet been harvested, nothing that is forgotten has the din of shechacha, because since the farmer is going to come back to harvest the part of the field that has not yet been harvested, the other items are not yet considered forgotten. Conversely, if you have a bundle that has not yet been collected, and that bundle is next to a forgotten bundle or next to forgotten grain, that yet to be collected bundle does not save the other items from becoming shechacha. Standing grain do you need? How much standing grain do you need in order to go ahead and save other items from becoming shechacha? Essentially, again, the Mishnah says that halacha l'maisa, even a single stalk of grain, even if one single stalk of grain that you know that the owner has not yet harvested and has intention to come back and harvest, ultimately, again, that saves other forgotten standing grain and a forgotten bundle from becoming shechacha. All right, shkayach everyone, we'll stop over here for today. Me'eretz Hashem will continue in testing you tomorrow. Wishing everyone a wonderful day.